I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about wellness trends for women, and we're going to touch briefly on men as well, and really what we're seeing as far as FemTech, wearable devices, sexual health, really the trends and why this matters when you're on the fertility journey. We're talking about a lot of different companies and things that can help you right now. So this was a really cool conversation. Excited for you to listen to it. Let's go. Hey there, I'm Sarah Clark, founder of FabFertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today, I'm welcoming back to the podcast Georgie Kovacs on the podcast, and we're digging into the top trends in women's health and FemTech and touching a little briefly on men's health as well. Georgie Kovacs has her MBA and is the founder of Fempower Health, which she founded after her firsthand experience with infertility, and leveraging this experience along with her 20-year tenure in the biopharmaceutical industry and consulting, she leads this movement. Thanks so much for listening. I'm so thankful that you're here. Make sure you hit subscribe or follow. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Georgie, excited to have you back on the podcast.
It's so nice to be back.
Yeah, excited here as we chat about all things women's health. We're going to go over some FemTech trends we're seeing. So excited to dig into these topics because as we were preparing ahead of time, I'm like, ooh, I love all this stuff. So, and definitely listen to Georgie's talk. We had talking all about some of the tests you should run for preconception health as you prepare for pregnancy. So definitely check out her talk there, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So when we talk about, why it's important to understand healthcare dynamics and really what you're seeing there, and why is it important that we are empowered and knowledgeable on these subjects?
Sure. I think, first of all, a theme that I see is a lot of us become aware that we need to know more about our health when we're struggling to get pregnant. I know that was my journey. And a lot of people that I speak with, that seems to be the path in. But what I really think is we need to be even more proactive. And the challenge is that we women aren't necessarily taught what normal is. Normal kind of is different for each woman, but there is obviously a parameter of normal. And then when we do bring things up, they tend to be normalized, whether it's clinicians, our family members, friends. And, what's also happening is when we do get into this space of trying to be proactive and trying to get answers, it's really hard to find those answers. And, I host a podcast where I interview experts on all women's health topics because I'm trying to help women understand the nuances, because really the subspecialists are the ones who tend to have the information, and our general practitioners don't have it as much unless they specialized in a specific area when they were, getting their education. So it's really complicated, and I think unless you understand the dynamics of what's going on behind the scenes, it's hard to understand why you can't get answers. And so I appreciate that you want to talk about the dynamics, because I think that really helps us be more educated in navigating the space.
Because sometimes when you're seeing your physician or a specialist, you may even start to second guess your innate knowledge of your own body. I'm in this space, and we do this on a daily basis. And sometimes I'll talk to my doctor, who, although my doctor is trained in functional medicine, integrative medicine, but will always trying to push a pill to me across the table. I'm like, but you're trained in this. What are you doing? So you have to really advocate and go wait a minute. And I know physicians get upset where you're my degree is more than your Dr. Google research abilities. And I'm like, that's just old fashioned way of looking at things. We are coming in as being our own advocate and empowered. And we have a little thing called the internet at our fingertips to do research. So we know. And so it's sort of to get that team together and pull in, your OBGYN, the RE, the nutrition practitioner, all these different people, because they all have different specialties, but you at the center, not just sort of giving your power over to the person in the white coat, I believe is key.
No, absolutely. And, it's funny that you say about us knowing our bodies so much and, meaning that you and I work in this space so much in great detail. So I've worked in the healthcare space my whole career. So I've, worked at biopharmaceutical companies. I've consulted for them. And then I had my fertility issues. And now my son has his own issues. And we're at the 3-year mark. My best friend is a doctor and, she's working on stuff for her mother-in-law and can't navigate it. So like, this is why it's like the subspecialist, like you have to find the exact right expert or exact right information for the specific thing you're dealing with. And, what's interesting is, when I've talked to some of the clinicians about this, there seems to be like one of the questions I always ask is, am I always just talking to the outliers, or are there more outliers than people realize? Because it does seem like there's a general path of what you should do for patients. But then, do you have data on have you been able to solve their problems or not? So I'm very curious of the space of how many really are struggling so much, because I don't know if the data is right there, but I don't know. I still see people suffering and struggling to get the answers.
Absolutely. I think these labels are completely, especially in all walks of anything to do with health, where they label you and then you feel, oh, wait, this is what it is, especially with the infertility diagnosis. This is my label. This is the only path for me. And that is such a myopic, old fashioned way of looking at it. It's like, we've got to look at the whole entire body. So,
No, absolutely. And
yeah.
this is why it's so cool to see all the things happening in women's health. I mean, so much is happening. I mean, there's still much more to be done and it's going to take some time, but really cool stuff for sure.
Absolutely. So let's dig into some wearables. So there's a lot of wearables on the market right now. So there's and there's ones that we like as well. So we like the Ava bracelet. That one's really good. We like Daisy is sort of tracking your like a thermometer. We like Temp Drop. We've got a episode, either come before or after this, talking all about the fertility awareness method. So Temp Drop can be really helpful. Another one that many people like Mira. Another one we're looking to bring into our program is Anito, which is actually like tracking the full hormones. So yeah, what are you seeing as far as wearables and devices and all things on that side?
Sure. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing. And, there's another interesting one, Ember Labs,
Okay.
and they have a wearable for helping with your body temperature, and it can actually adjust the temperature changes. So if you're having like hot flashes or always really cold, they can work on that. So what they're trying to do is really focus on the perimenopause and menopause space. And, because originally they started out with a different area, I think with athletes, and then they just found that so many women who are struggling with hot flashes, et cetera, are having success. So that's another cool thing that I'm seeing. And I think what's going to be interesting though with the wearables is like how many things can you wear, and that's what's interesting with women's health is there's so many different types of companies coming along. And I always wonder from the consumer perspective, what does that mean? Is everything going to be bought by like Apple Watch and then you have one wearable? So all the technology will be in one place, or are we I'll be required to have like 10 different things over our lifespan, depending on the specific thing that we're trying to track.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I know because they're saying Ava is sort of like the Fitbit for women. This Anito one, which we're looking at, it kind of will look at the measures the levels of estrogen and progesterone, sort of takes away doing that monthly blood work. So it's just at your fingertips, which can be really cool. But yeah, it is interesting to see how many of these devices do you wear, and then also with the EMFs. Now these ones, as far as I know, don't have EMFs. There's like the Aura Ring and things like that too,
Yes.
but which is like a very minimal amount. But yeah, that's the whole thing of like we're telling people to take the phone out of the bedroom, and you don't want to have a TV in there, all these different EMFs that you could be exposed to, which are then impacting your sleep, your health, and many people can be extremely sensitive to EMFs. So to have sort of protective things to help them when they're in that vicinity of EMFs is another thing to look at. That's why the fertility awareness method of actually tracking your basal body temperature and looking at your cervical mucus, which none of us are taught in any kind of, the sexual health course. And, when we're in school about what's our basal body temperature and our cervical mucus, everyone's like, it sounds gross, cervical mucus or cervical fluid, but we should know this stuff.
Yes. 100%. 100%. Tell me about the one you were saying that measures the progesterone and estrogen. It seemed, because I hadn't heard of this one. It's
Yeah.
impossible when I'm tracking all the women's health conditions to know every single new product that comes out. So tell me more about that one.
Yeah, Inito, INITO. So all the hormone markers can be measured. So we're just looking into it to potentially, being to recommend them and trying to get them on the podcast and things like that too. So it's just a one-stop shop. So because many
How
times,
are they tracking it though? Is it through urine or finger prick?
Yeah. So I guess it's yeah, so test strips. So which fairly easy to do then. So but yeah, so let's talk about some telehealth. What are some obviously the pandemic, I think it's obviously the pandemic hasn't been great, but from a seeing your physician kind of thing, I'm like, I don't need to personally go into my physician's office. No, thank you. And now that they're either on the phone or doing a virtual consult, to me, I think it's great. For our business, it's always been virtual. So I just like the ease of that. So what are you seeing kind of with the telehealth and people switching over and really, I guess, really being able to serve a more international or global population?
Sure. I mean, I will say all of FemTech and COVID have really forced the medical community to rethink how they're delivering services. And so, COVID specifically, I would say, accelerated changes that probably would have happened later. Mental health is a big one. There are a lot of different mental health, telehealth products out there. And I've been hearing, really good reviews, but even if you already have a mental health expert, they're open to doing things telehealth. I know there were state laws changing around if you could do out of state or whatnot. I think that you cannot do anymore. But then you have a couple of other startups like Maven was already out before COVID. And you can just imagine, I mean, they're the first unicorn, meaning first billion-dollar evaluation FemTech company. And they're focusing on pregnancy and motherhood. I know they're also looking into fertility. And I would not be surprised if they get into menopause and perimenopause. Right now, there are specific startups in that space. I know some are struggling to succeed just because now what's happening is specifically to perimenopause and menopause. And a lot of these, they all focus on one specific area. And then they realize that they really need to meet the woman across her entire life cycle. So kind of like all of us, we entered into knowing about our health and the ins and outs of women's health through the fertility space. They're all picking theirs. And then we realize it's a broader scope. And so, but yeah, fertility was the big one. And now it's really perimenopause and menopause, but generally telehealth, we see all the different categories. Another one is Parsley Health, which is naturopaths. But the model, it's interesting. I'm very curious on behind the scenes, what's happening, because, initially the way they're starting out is it's essentially OBGYNs or other types of doctors like Parsley Health is the naturopaths and functional medicine doctors, where they're essentially booking whatever spare time they have, or maybe they're just doing this as their sole method, especially with COVID. I would not be surprised. But, what happens after that? So if you need a subspecialist or specialist, like that's going to be their thing, is how else do they refer out? And so I think understanding the limitations. Another interesting one is TIA. They, I believe, started in New York City, and what they're doing, I don't know how much telehealth, to be honest with you, but what they're doing is they've realized what's missing in a lot of areas is the cross-functional team. And so they have all the cross functions in their own space, but it's an actual physical clinic. And I know they're expanding. So that's kind of their specific area. But now what's challenging is there's all these great ideas. How does the woman choose? Which one does she go to? if she's got different I mean, as a woman, like I wouldn't know to do like a market assessment to say, which of these femtech companies should I go after? It's, through friends, et cetera. And for, customer acquisition costs. So how is it that they are able to acquire customers? I hear is one of the greatest challenges right now, because now there's so many in the space of all women's health.
Yeah, with Parsley Health, kind of, I think they've exploded in the last couple of years, as far as I understand, just with different, and they've got different offices throughout the country, because they started in New York, as far as I know. And yeah, I haven't heard of TIA. Is that TEA or
TIA?
Oh, TIA. Okay.
Yeah, I know they had a place in Manhattan, and last I checked, they were expanding into other areas.
And then, so what about, so we were talking about the last 5 years, it was all about infertility. So like egg freezing, which is huge, tracking and more. I think that to me, the egg freezing just gives this false sense of security, but hey, because if you're freezing eggs that haven't, there's issues with, with your health, and then you're thinking, oh my goodness, in 10 years when I'm ready, and then doesn't mean that it's going to be, actually going to work for you. So to me, it's always good to work on your health before you do anything with your with your eggs. But yeah, what are you seeing there as far as the fertility? And now it looks like it's shifting a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it all started with tracking. We had all these tracking apps, and I lost count in how many there were. And what's happening with tracking is, at first it was apps. So it was like very simple apps of period tracking. And then it became, tracking different things about your cycle and giving you, just in time information about your cycle. And then it's now moved into using devices to be able to track your cycle. So, we were talking earlier about AVA, and now being able to pee on strips to understand your hormone levels. There's Modern Fertility, which was bought out by one of the, I think it was LabCorp or Quest, one of the
were they
two.
bought out? I didn't know that. Okay.
They were bought out. And so they were one of the first actually to start out in this space of, they were really all about, why do we have to wait for the OBGYN, and why are the lab tests so expensive? So let's do them at home. So they were really the innovators in that space. And now they've been bought out by a larger lab company. I just can't remember offhand if it was LabCorp or Quest.
Yeah, I had the founder on my on the podcast here, so we talked
wonderful
about testing and stuff like that. Yeah, at that point she was just getting into Walmart, getting the tests into Walmart, because the tests were fairly inexpensive.
Yep. And so, they're great for, awareness. And then once we got the tracking down, like people were getting into coaching, like there were one-on-one women who had their fertility experience and they wanted to do coaching. There's organizations like yours that are really building out this cross-functional team to do an overall assessment for women and provide them guidance. And egg freezing, like 2012, what they approved egg freezing. And then I would say 2018, 19, 20, that's when like all the companies descended on egg freezing, which was crazy. And what's interesting is one of the business models, which it's actually really smart, is become an egg freezing company, but really like pitch egg freezing, but it's really all about great OBGYN care. And so if you think about it, if you're an OBGYN, you can talk to women proactively about preserving their fertility. But like you said, it's not a guarantee. And so, that's another thing. And then we got into male fertility, like Daddy Kit. The founder, Tom Smith, is absolutely amazing. He was on my podcast and I was blown away. He is truly an amazing leader, and congratulations to him, because Roe bought them out, and he only started in 3 years he was bought out, and truly super guy, great company. And so now we're really getting into male fertility. And so what I hope to see is, just getting more clarity so that women understand where to go, because it is so much now, right? But then, I think the next area is just going to be continuing to innovate on the data to speed the time for people to have, success with their fertility. I mean, there's long journeys for many, many people. And so, like, I know one person is trying to innovate in the space of talking to people well before they go to an REI and helping diagnostics improve more speedily to then be able to direct women in the right direction. So you kind of see this more navigation into the how, and just optimizing technology and data.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, just on the sponsor of our podcast is Legacy. So we have the at home sperm testing or semen testing kits, which have been like a game changer for our clients, because a lot, like, really, what guy wants to go to the doctor, book that appointment and get that done, where this can be done at home, shipped out. This is only in the US.
Yep.
But it's been really, and they just give a really great synopsis, including morphology and DNA fragmentation at a fairly reasonable price. That's just been easy because, we're typically dealing with female factor infertility, but we always need to look at the male. And many times people are so focused on the female partner, the man hasn't even had a semen analysis. And I'm like, or if he has, he's been told it's fine. And maybe they're looking at it through conventional reference ranges. And maybe there's some areas for improvement there, or maybe it's totally fine. And he, then we can rule that out, but there's still things he can do to work on his health. So the male fertility piece, I think, has been, the book came out there with, I had her on the podcast here, Dr. Shauna. Anyways, she's talking about in the last 50 years how male fertility has reduced by, the last 40 years, male fertility is reduced by 50%. So it's, it's the environment is this like toxic soup that is really impacting male fertility. So yeah, definitely for men to get tested and make the changes too.
Yeah. And what's interesting, though, with the at home that I wonder is how actionable results are. Like with sperm freezing, that's easy. You get the data for the quality and anything that you need to understand about it. And then you can, freeze the sperm and then use them whenever you need to. But for things like the blood testing and the hormone testing, the questions are how actionable they are. Like I've seen people send in, get their reports, but then they don't really know what to do. And if you don't have a whole system set up around that, then it can be a struggle, because what do you do? Then go to your doctor. And, as you started out, like sometimes doctors have a certain reaction of if you've Googled something or whatnot. So the industry is still very siloed. And, by day I'm a consultant. So I always look at how the pieces fit together. And my specialty is like the whole process optimization. And so right now there's all these things. And unfortunately, we as the consumer have to put the pieces together. And it's hard, and it's not a perfect answer. Like even when I interview guests across all women's health topics, sometimes the themes are similar, but not always. And, so then it's like, what do you do? And that's why it's really important to be proactive and knowledgeable so that you can ask the right questions and then figure out what's right for you.
Yeah, because people get very hung up on these tests, and the tests are only the beginning. And if you get the test, then you know how to interpret it and make the changes. It's important to have a practitioner that knows what they're doing to review the test with you, because you can pay for this test and you get it and you're like, oh my goodness, this is what I need to do. And really, is that what you need to do? So it's important to have someone that, knows what they're doing. I think that's key.
And, I have to say this, the past year, I would say, I've had such an interesting turn in a couple of the interviewees I've had on the podcast. They're folks who started out years ago. I mean, they're in their 70s, 80s, and like really innovative healthcare providers. They're often like the last line of defense when you're struggling. And one of the gentlemen I interviewed, he made such an interesting statement. He said, when he was in medical school, he was trained cross-functionally. And now people are asked to specialize so early in their careers. Mm-hmm. And then he also gave an interesting point. So he's able to like ask the questions and kind of put pieces together because he had generalized training. The other piece, which I had never thought about, is the flip side of our reliance on data. And so one of the things he's finding is that when doctors aren't able to leverage some technology to be able to get an answer, a lot of them get stuck. and they give like maybe a generalized, like unexplained diagnosis
Mm.
because they're not taught to think as critically. And it's so much of the reliance on data. But we know that there's a lot of data gaps, especially when it comes to women's health. And I'd never really thought about it that way, but I'm like, all right, that makes sense.
That's the beauty of functional medicine. We don't get stuck in those little, oh my goodness, you have a skin condition or you have you get UTIs or you have brain fog. It's like it's all connected. It's one part instead of see the dermatologist, see the gastroenterologist, see the RE, and wait a minute, let's look at the whole body.
Well, sometimes it's us as patients too. We want the quick fix.
Oh
I mean, I'm
yeah,
curious, do you still see a lot of that as the quick fix? Like I remember someone on TikTok posted, "Oh, I saw this influencer drinking this green juice and she's bloated and it got rid of her bloating. And hopefully when I go out tonight, my bloating will be gone because I'm drinking the same green juice." And I'm like, but do you know why you're bloating?
exactly. Like I don't know. I just think there isn't a quick fix. Like you've had this thing for how many years? And yeah, in a short period of time, you can start feeling amazing and noticing massive changes. But I've had people saying, "What's the pill I can take for that?" Now, obviously, there are some basic fertility supplements and things like that that can help, but you can't out supplement your way out of a poor diet. There's just you can't fake not getting enough sleep. You can't be sedentary or overworking. And also, like a huge one we see all the time is this chronic stress, like the mental health side of things, dealing with the fertility diagnosis, and then also navigating the world at large and like being scared even to bring kids into the world potentially. So all of emotional side of things is key. So to get support on that kind of stuff. But yeah, like it is people wanting, because most people are impatient. They just want to like get this thing done and go forward. But I like the analogy of like you spend 12 to 18 months planning your wedding. Let's do a similar thing here as you plan for your family.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And one other thing that I want to address too is the sexual health piece.
yeah.
Because you were mentioning mental health, but I'm just thinking of those struggling with infertility and the schedule, of
Mhm.
timing intercourse. And there's actually a couple of startups that I think it's important to educate people on. So the first one is, and by the way, I'm not getting paid for any of this. These are genuine companies that I think are cool.
Yeah.
So Dipsy,
Yeah.
I met the founder when she first started out, and I
Oh,
remember I ran up to her and I was like, "You need to market to the fertility space
yeah.
because I will tell you, like that schedule is a nightmare." And I'm so proud of her. She just did a TED talk in Vancouver, not
Oh, wow.
TEDx, TED, and
Okay.
she did it with Elon Musk. Bill Gates was there, like totally impressive. And I can't wait to see the talk. But her whole thing is around sexual education, and it's a great app. I mean, I will not lie, I use it and I think it's absolutely fantastic. You pick the scene, and what they're doing now is they have famous actors doing their voices, so that if you want to listen to that actor, and they have all sorts of scenes, and they have all the categories and you pick, and then of course using their AI, they feed you other things. And then another cool one is Rosie, and that was developed by an OBGYN. And she was struggling to provide sexual education to her patients and realized that so many of her colleagues were as well. And so she engaged the subspecialists who are experts in sexual health. And it's an app where you can get an education on it. And what I love is she's taking all the different topics. So she has like experts talking about sexual health and fertility, sexual health and cancer. And so she takes like all the gaps, in the space. And she's really going to both the consumer and OBGYNs and leveraging it as something that should be a dual conversation, because doctors, let's face it, aren't taught how to talk to patients, much less talk to patients about sexual health. And I've even spoke to male doctors who said they don't feel it's appropriate to bring up sexual health. So if you have a male OBGYN and you have a sexual health issue, they may not ask you because they feel like it's inappropriate because you're a woman.
Yeah.
So there's all these interesting dynamics. And what I loved about Rosie, so if I were to compare the two apps, like Dipsy, they do actually teach you things as well, but the ones that are at the forefront are the apps where you just kind of get into a scene and it'll tell you like how many minutes and where the hot, sexy parts begins. And Rosie is really interesting because one of the ones I listened to before I did the interview with the founder is it was a woman's perspective. So her husband, the scene was her husband wanted her to do a threesome for their anniversary. And it was like the woman getting dressed and like saying, I feel so uncomfortable. Like, this is so weird, but I'm kind of excited and blah, 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 blah. And then they do the scene. And what I loved about that is, you know, our sexual health, like certain things are really hard to talk about. And you may be like, is this just me? And so she kind of went into the woman's head in the scene as they were doing the scene. And so, you know, they're different, and I encourage people to check them out. I just think they're so interesting.
Yeah, I
So,
came across Dipsy. Yeah, I guess when did she start it? Maybe a couple of years ago. I think I saw it on Well and Good's Trends, and it kind of came up there. The erotic stories,
yep.
which are really you can pick what kind of your own little lane, which way where you want to go. Rosie with a Y. I haven't heard of that one. It's interesting because as I'm always working to improve my couples coaching program, so I'm looking for referral partners and bringing on a sex coach. And so I had to vet the sex coach. So I had my first little talk with her, and it was yeah, it's interesting. A lot of these things, you know, I'm fairly open, but like as we're talking about this sort of stuff, I'm like, a lot of these things you just don't talk really to anyone about these things. And especially for on the fertility journey, the thing that actually gives you pleasure and joy and actually helps you get out of that fight or flight and into the parasympathetic is sex and intimacy. And it's not always sex, but intimacy
Yes.
can be, it's now got like, oh my goodness, all these parameters, and it feels perhaps robotic, or it's, you know, you've got to just go during your fertile window and things like that. So all of that can be lost. And so bringing back that intimacy with these, whatever works for you, I think is like awesome. Yeah. So Dipsy and Rosie. And what about Laurels?
It's funny. I have a meeting with the founder later today,
Oh,
so I
cool.
can tell you even more then. A friend of mine knows her, and so we'll be connecting. But you know, Laurel's is really interesting because it's supposed to help prevent STDs through oral sex, from my understanding.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm excited to learn a bit more about the nuances. And so, but that's at the moment, that's all I can come. And also congratulations to them because they just got FDA approval.
Okay.
So, so
So
big, big
is it
deal.
a cream, or what? Like, what do you mean?
No, it's like underwear. And yeah,
Underwear. Oh,
yeah, it
okay.
is. It's really fast. I mean, I have to like better understand it because I'm still stuck on the wait, what?
Huh?
I won't lie. So
Yeah.
I'm intrigued because the websites only tell you so much. So when it comes to like when I have the whole like, wait, what? I want to talk to the founder to better understand
Yeah,
it. So
absolutely. Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so then the at-home blood test, sperm freezing, telehealth, I guess those are the at-home kind of side of things that we're seeing. We don't need to leave our house. We can have everything delivered.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I think it's really just the one thing I will say about the at-home pieces is the trust factor. And so, um, you know, I don't have a perfect answer on which ones we should trust because a lot of people say, well, I'd like to understand, you know, the specific methodology that they're using, like even with the peon, you know, strips. Like there's actually a cool one called Vessel Health where that is supposed to tell you all kinds of different blood levels, or not blood levels, excuse me, because you're peeing, but all the different levels of various vitamins and minerals in your body to be able to provide customized supplement recommendations. So the question is with all of these tests is, you know, what is the true best scientific way? Because there's all these nuances in how well the tests work and what information it can give you. But then there's the dynamic of like MDs are trained that it should be a blood serum test. So the question is, are these guides? Are they accurate? Is it that doctors need to change their mindset? Is this a whole different way we should be operating? And, you know, until we have like clinical trials on this, it's hard to answer that question. So I feel like at this point, it's everyone's opinion. So it's a wait and see. I'm curious, you know, your perspective.
It's interesting with that I think it's a Netflix or maybe it's Prime, the Dropout with Amanda Seyfried. She's playing the was it Theros? Or I can't remember.
Yes, Theranos.
Theranos,
It's
yeah.
great, great,
Yeah. So
great.
I'm working my way through that, but it's interesting that where she was, developing this thing that was going to be in everyone's home to test people's blood, and really it never worked. And so she managed to get all sorts of like huge amount of investors. And I think that there was a trial that was still on, so I haven't really followed it too much. But yeah, some of these things where people are just like, just go out and sell it, and you'll figure it out later. And then, yeah, as you say, the trust piece of that is it really a viable product that actually works?
Yeah. And, I watched that, I guess, documentary. And I guess if it's an actor, maybe it's a movie, but it's a movie about a person. I don't know how you would categorize that.
Yeah.
But, what struck me in that is she had a really cool story to tell. And if you look at it, the people who didn't understand the science were bought into the story, and the people who understood the science weren't. Mm-hmm. So you almost have to look at the investors. But I'm like sitting here. So what are we going to do? Tell your listeners, like, okay, here's how you evaluate who's investing in the company of the thing that you might want to use. Like, I don't think that's the case, but I think it's important for people to understand it's way more simplistic than the marketing. Like, equate it to when you go shopping in the food aisle. And on the beginning, it says healthy. On the front, it says healthy, low fat, or whatever it's going to claim. And then you look at the back and you read the ingredients, and it's like, nope. And so to me, that's how we should look at a lot of these new products. Like, again, I'm not at all poo-pooing any of them. I think a lot of them are so fantastic, but I think we just also need to better understand them before we make decisions to use them.
And what about the customization piece? What are you seeing there?
Yeah. So I'd mentioned Vessel Health, where they're looking at, they're kind of getting into the whole customization of supplementation. So they've been around for a little bit, and I think they're still evolving, as do all of these companies. They iterate quickly, otherwise they won't grow. Another one that people are really getting into is around autoimmune disease. Yeah. And I went to a conference last year where I was moderating a session on endometriosis, and it seems like there's a few players now that are trying to understand the root cause of autoimmune disease. So I can only speak to specifically, oh my goodness, what is the name of it? Mimi. So I can speak to Mimi. And Mette Durberg is the founder, and it was really interesting. So how they started is she was an economist and had all these autoimmune issues and just could not get better. And she was so fed up. And so she started putting together a model of the different things that were and weren't working for her. And she was able to figure out what her triggers were and basically cured her own autoimmune disease. And when she went to her doctors, they said to her she was never sick in the first place. So can you imagine the blow? But anyway, so she's been doing this. And what's so cool is now, because of all the data that they have, they are able to figure out, based on a couple of criteria or even a specific family history, which autoimmune disease, well, you would already know the autoimmune disease, but she would be able to figure out what likely triggers are, so that they can more quickly figure out how they can help you. And she's not at all saying they cure and that no one now ever needs medications and all medications for autoimmune disease are bad. That is not at all what she's doing. But I think it's really helping minimize the negative impacts and side effects. And one of the big things that they're really doing now is also COVID long haulers. Okay. So it's just really interesting how people are leveraging actual data to start figuring out where the issues are. And, I'm hoping with the fertility space, as well, that starts to happen. I know you're doing it from a functional medicine perspective. I think some of the learnings there and other data should get into the medical space as well.
Absolutely. There's a number of studies on AIP and hashes and how that can be reversed. We see it, antibodies in 900s come down to, under 100. And what was the name of that company you said?
Mimi. So MYMEE.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing OBGYN field evolving into some subspecialists. What's happening?
Yeah. So what's interesting is one of the themes I'm learning is you almost have to find a subspecialist for a lot of the different areas. Once you get past the general, right, and you're struggling to find answers, you almost have to find that subspecialist. And the challenge with that, obviously, is a lot of those tend to be cash paying. So when you get to the disadvantaged populations, that becomes a challenge in and of itself. But I was interviewing a doctor recently on menopause, and she actually even said what she's finding is that the doctors really are almost becoming specialists. So what you almost have to do is better understand what's going on with your body and then figuring out the specialist. So for example, even OBGYNs, like you may have an OBGYN who studied hormones in depth. And so you may want to find someone like that. In her case, because she's older and she's starting to see older patients, she's really focusing and really knowledgeable on perimenopause and menopause. And I learned that on the NAMS website, so the North American Menopause Society, they have a list of doctors who do have specific expertise in treating menopausal symptoms. So she was saying that she's just seeing that trend where people are having their own specific focus areas. And we may not all know of these subspecialties, but I would encourage folks that, if you're having a specific issue, you may want to even talk to your OBGYN about an expert, or talk to people that or do a search engine research on, say, Google, and just type in like OBGYN hormone or functional medicine doctor hormones. And I just think, understanding how that works is really important to finding answers. Because, I don't think we all would think of it that way, but that's what seems to be happening. And also, too, people are just getting frustrated with how reimbursement works and all the changes with COVID. People are really burned out and frustrated. So it's forcing them to rethink. And so that's also creating a huge change. So any of the generalist type doctors we're seeing, I have a feeling that's going to be changing over time as well.
Yeah, I'm in a mastermind with a lot of functional docs and OBGYNs that are functional. And they're moving into a more like specializing on something. Potentially they've had their dark night of the soul and had to deal with something. So whether it be weight loss, or maybe they're taking PCOS, or menopause seems to be a big one too. So lots to kind of specialize, I guess, from a doctor burnout perspective, going down that road. And so what about social media? What are you seeing? Like, how do you, there's so much on there, right? To be like the whole trust piece again. How do you know what to trust?
Yeah. I interviewed one person. She's actually she's in medical school now, training to be a naturopathic doctor. And she gave some really helpful advice, which is, try to find at least 3 sources that validate what it is that you're hearing. And I know it's really hard because, I was on a 4-year infertility journey, and, I had my breakfast bowl of supplements, because of and I would do anything. Like if someone said, stand on your head for an hour a day, I would do it. And so it's hard when you've really been struggling, but I think it's important to think of the long road. And the more we rush to do something, hoping to solve it, we actually might be wasting our time. And I think one perspective is, are you yourself asking the right question? And do you know the medical history of the person? Like, for example, the person who drank the juice for bloating and another person said, oh, I want to do that just because of that. Why was there bloating? I remember something that actually transformed me from focusing on fertility to broader women's health was a post on Reddit where a woman was asking, how many embryos should I use? I have eggs frozen and I keep having miscarriages. And I was happy she actually shared that, because I wrote back to her. I was like, you're asking the wrong question. Your question should be, why am I miscarrying? Because she was 42. And I was like, if you use all these embryos, that's it. They were your youngest, best embryos. And until you get answers to the miscarriage, they're frozen in time. And granted, she's getting older. And as you get older, there's other complications with pregnancy. So I guess, I would say, like, if she would have rushed to it, see the implications of what could have happened. And so I would just encourage everyone is like, pause, assess, really think about, do you know your root cause? and be able to ask the right questions and do the research and due diligence. Make sure, like, you can go on Google Scholar and research some of the facts that people are talking about. So social media is great. Like if it's a doctor, like Jill Craft, who's talking about all the pain with sex. She's great. And Dr. Laura Shaheen talks a lot about miscarriages, and there's so many who are great, but if it's just, I don't know, you just have to really vet it. So I would just be cautious. I'm glad because it's raising awareness, but I would not use it as, therefore, this is my medical diagnosis and prescription of how I'm going to heal and get better.
And for me, if it's a person is a conventional doctor, then is that the right thing too? So just because you have the doctor title, we're not in the era where we may be in the era that we trust doctors, but I'm not sure if we're now, leaning towards trusting ourselves. So to me, that's
no, it's
well, or someone that's been on their own journey. And there's interesting though, where something may have worked for you and you've made all these changes, but will it work for another person? That's why diets, like you're like, oh, this diet's been great for me, but then the other person doesn't, and it does nothing. So it is that very personalized approach. A lot of these DNA companies sort of spitting out data, then you've got that personalized diet, lifestyle supplements that are personalized, which I think kind of is key as well. And then what about education and advocacy? Anything you wanted to say there?
No, I would say that, one avenue is if you're struggling to get answers, I always say start with the advocacy groups and make sure that you're focusing on advocacy groups that both have patients and doctors. I find, and also make sure that they're doing research. So if it's just about raising funds to do walks and raise awareness, like I'm not at all saying those are bad, but you really want, a cross-functional team that is working together around a given condition. And I will give huge kudos to, many of these organizations. I mean, they are doing incredible efforts to collaborate and raise funds. Like this year alone, endometriosis and lupus have both raised significant dollars for research, because a lot of these conditions we just don't fully understand. But what's important to know is that we're in a situation, like I'll give you an example, endometriosis. A lot of people are debating about the diagnosis. I mean, we know right now laparoscopic surgery is, the way to diagnose it with certainty. But even if you get it diagnosed, what are your options? And the theme there seems to be the earlier you catch it, the more likelihood is you have a surgery and then you're going to be fine. But a lot of people are diagnosed late, and then the options for them aren't that great. And the likelihood for repeat surgery, tends to be higher. And so, we're in this dynamic of a lot still needs to be done to make sure that we have diagnostics and that we have the right treatments to help people along their journeys. But again, the increased funding is a huge, huge win, and we just need more of that.
Yeah, funding can definitely be good in bringing awareness to these conditions that, endo, I think takes like 12 years to get diagnosed. People are just made feel that it's all in their head, or, it's psychosomatic or something, when I'm like, no, every month when you have your period, you're crippled over in pain. And, even a male doctor telling them, no, you're wrong. No, keep pushing forward on that for sure. And, we see people, obviously, surgery can be part of it, but also the targeted diet and lifestyle changes, which usually there's no money that goes into, hey, let's eat a good healthy diet, maybe take out the gluten. And, there's not a lot of cash that goes into that. And some of the other groups in the fertility space where it's all funded by big pharma, I don't know. That's, to me, is there's a little bit of a conflict of interest, but hey, so it's sort of to choose your group wisely.
Yeah.
I would say.
It's hard. And the issue is, like, I know, I work in the industry, and, I think there's a lot to be understood. Like, I'm not at all saying that there aren't challenges, but at the end of the day, fortunately or unfortunately, that's where the dollars are, and they're able to fund that research. And so until we get away from a capitalistic society in healthcare, fortunately or unfortunately, we do have to rely on that research. And, it's hard because it's really expensive to do the research. It's hard to enroll women. People are afraid to enroll women. And trying to do the right clinical trial design to get the answers. It's extremely complex. And I have to say, sometimes it's frustrating that it gets oversimplified. But again, I know everyone has their different opinions, but I'll just tell you, working in the industry, we are not sitting around a table waiting to figure out how we can screw people over. It's just very hard. And we're kind of victims of how we're set up with healthcare. So again, it's complex. So it's not good or bad. It's not perfect or imperfect. Nope. It just is what it is. It's hard.
And so, where can the listeners find you? You have your podcast and you've got your site here. So fempower-health.com. Definitely check out Georgie's site there. She's got like heaps of information to really on all things women's health. Some of the things that we've talked on today, she'll be giving you some deeper dives. And you have a podcast. So where can they find you and what are you up to right now?
Yeah, sure. So you can listen to the podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So Apple, Spotify. And if you go to my website, once you click on the podcast page, you can pick where you want to be listening to it. And, I'm really focused now on figuring out how to better support women, because as we discussed today, it's not easy. And where are you in your health and what's the best way to support you, especially with how complex this all is and how many people are coming into the market trying to help women. It just gets confusing. And so honestly, I'm thinking about how we can streamline that. And, I just, at this point, I would say, keep finding the experts that you trust, keep asking questions, advocate for yourself, and get to know your body, track, and just be educated and proactive. And, you will get the answers that you need. It just may take some time. So I hope that everyone has hope, because I'm truly thrilled at all the companies that are starting up. And thank you for everything that you're doing for women who are struggling to get pregnant and who truly want to go that natural route. I think it's important work.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I enjoyed our conversation and really kind of looking at all the things that are happening in these space for women that, for many years, when you go to the doctor's office, women's health and women's health issues either been medical gaslighting, just ignored. And now it's like coming to the surface. Now, obviously there's huge money and money behind it, but it is interesting to see as we go into this next era of what the changes will lead to and kind of what's available for us as consumers. So awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.